Okay. Okay, very good. I think it's one of those hands off. Sorry, we're on YouTube. I don't want to be anti anything. Please don't come to the synagogue. Nobody at the synagogue's got anything to do with anything. It's wonderful to see everyone here for Torah study this morning. Absolutely. And that's always good to be. We should always be pro-Constitution. That's for certain. Well, these days words can seem to mean anything you want, but words that can't mean anything you want are the words of our blessing for Torah study. So let's now turn. Remember, you can get yourself towards where it's 2 Samuel chapter 11. Big stuff is about to happen. But first, for our blessing, the study of Torah that ends La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You say Amen, you get full credit. There you go. Okay, and now we have 2 Samuel chapter 11. Okay, so at the turn of the year, the season when kings go out to battle. So, we see this in the world today, even, right? When you see conflicts that when it gets too wet and rainy, then it's too muddy, and it's very much the same when everybody has to walk. And there are certain seasons when it doesn't make a lot of sense to be fighting in the Middle East, but this was a season when it made perfect time to do so. David sent Yoav with his officers and all Israel with him, and they devastated Ammon and besieged Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem. So, there you go. Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to make inquiries about her. He reported, she is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite. These guys are both these big military figures in this army. David sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him, and he lay with her. She had just purified herself, and she went back home. So we're just going to go over. I'm not going to say anything. I mean, we can say more about that if we want. The text is not going to say anything, right? This is as nice as it can be. Chronicles, but this is as nice as it's willing, just by going over it. And said, okay, finish this off. The woman conceived, and she sent word to David. She said, "Hey, that one time when I got pregnant." Thereupon David sent a message to Joab. So send Uriah the Hittite to me, and Joab sent. So we sent a message to his top general, and we said, "Hey, this guy, he's a big warrior. Can you send him to me?" So, I mean, I'm sure we all know where the story is going because we've heard the story. But what do we have about the figure of David? What's the most charitable interpretation? Pretend you're the book of Torah. What's the most charitable interpretation you can come up with here for our king? He didn't go out to battle. Here in chapter 11, because does it resonate with the David we've been reading about for a book and a half? It does seem strange, right? It seems incongruous. Does it? Well, that's another thing. do you believe that it seems inconvenience? I mean, he did dance all wild with the ladies in the streets. Um, and as we know, being a king, what do we say? Power corrupts. He may not have complete absolute power the way we think about, a King Louis absolute power. So he's not exactly on that level, but he's got a lot of power, and it probably corrupts a bit. So there's certainly an argument for it, but this seems to be a change in his, yeah. That's true, absolutely. But like, here's why I'm asking this is because so you've had very much the political David and the pious David that we've been contrasting. So we've had the David who maybe just does things because they're what's going to work out best for him politically, and the David who he might be doing it because he's a true believer and thinks he's doing the best thing. As this story unfolds, keep in mind, does it even fit with political? Is this a wise, smart, political, savvy, cunning move? Or how did David fall into this trap? How did David allow himself to succumb to his basest? Sure. And it was 3,000 years ago, so. Well, sure, yes, absolutely. He's flawed like any other human character would be. We'll get to the end of the story, and I want to go back to political versus pious David, where you think the story fits into that. So Yoav sent Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, to when Uriah came to him, verse 7, David asked him how Yoav and the troops were faring and how the war was going. So he didn't obviously call, again, this is just more subterfuge, more hiddenness, more, lack of transparency. It makes it seem like he called him there to report. Even like he's like, oh, Yoav, send this guy to me. He's like, how's Yoav doing? Is he doing okay? Are the troops doing okay? You and I are real close, Uriah, so you can tell me what's going on, right? What does that do? It builds trust, right? Even though we all know there's no trust here. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and bathe your feet. When Uriah left the royal palace, a present from the king followed him. It says, Steinsaltz notes from the commentary that it says, as befitting a warrior returning from the battlefront, the king sent Uriah a gift. So it's all done the way it's supposed to be done for a military figure, right? He comes, he gives a report to the king, he gets a couple days leave, he gets a gift from the king. It's all very much all the way it's supposed to be. And of course, what is David hoping will happen? David decided, now of course, David's first plan isn't what he ends up doing. Thankfully, you might even say, because what he ends up doing is way worse. What he first says is, the woman says she's pregnant. Well, we don't have great ultrasounds and whatnot and things and DNA tests in 3000 BC, in 1000 BCE. So he'll come home. He'll have a couple of days off. He'll stay at his house. Obviously, he'll have relations with his wife because he's a soldier who's been away from him. And when she gives birth, he'll say, wonderful, I have a son or daughter, Baruch Hashem, what could be bad? And David will go, okay, just hope the kid isn't a redhead. And as long as he's not, David goes, okay, no harm, no foul. Yeah, no, I mean Uriah's happy, and Bathsheba's happy, and the kid is happy, and I'm happy. Everybody's happy. So clearly, his first plan might fit in the political David sense. It seems very cunning. There's a problem, though. But, verse 9, Uriah slept at the entrance of the royal palace along with the other officers of his lord and did not go down to his house. Right? There's a garrison at the palace. And because he's an active duty soldier, you might say, in modern parlance, he stayed on base because he's trying to show he's a man of the, he's a soldier just like everyone else. He'd gotten all this favor from the king. Maybe he doesn't want others to think he's a, he's like a diplomat or trying to be political or whatever. No, he's just like the other soldiers. So he's staying with the other soldiers. He's not taking advantage of the opportunity, which wouldn't be breaking the rules, but maybe isn't exactly the best form. Right? So, okay, he didn't go down to his house. When David was told that Uriah hadn't gone down to his house, he said to Uriah, "You just came from a journey. Why didn't you go down to your house?" Basically being like, this is me giving you permission. Go ahead. Go enjoy. Uriah answered David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are located at Sukkot, and my master Joab and your majesty's men are camped in the open." Dangerous. They could have to fight even against a night raid or something. How can I go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As you live by your very life, I will not do this. Right? So the problem is Uriah is too good a guy. The problem is he's too pious. He's too loyal. He's so loyal to David and to the concept. Again, part of this stems from the very first verse of chapter 11. David, for reasons we don't know, we can speculate on, isn't with his forces. Remember, it said when kings go out to battle. The king's men are all out of battle. The king is sleeping with women back at home. Which, I mean, why is he doing this? So this is again, Uriah's like, hey, all of your forces, but all of your forces are out about to fight big battles. They're in camp. They're out in the open. It's not appropriate for me as a leader in that army to be. Hey, he's saying to be acting like you, right? I mean, he's saying to be at home, sleeping with people, enjoying couches, having the good life. He says it's not appropriate right now. To me, it sounds like a rebuke of David, but by your very life, by the king's life, I won't act like the king is acting. That's what it sounds like to me. So no good for David on the Uriah sleeps with Bathsheba, and their kid just becomes Uriah's kid. And now for another plan. David said to Uriah, "Stay here today also, and tomorrow I will send you off." So it's okay. Maybe it's evening already. He says, "Okay, stay overnight. Tomorrow, go back. You're obviously no use to me." Right. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. The next day, David summoned him and he ate and drank with him until he got drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep in the same place with his lord's officers. He did not go down to his house. So David tried one more time. He tried to give him some wine, and he was like, "Oh yeah, now you'll go down to your house because you're drunk." Nope, no luck. Still went back to the officers' barracks and garrison. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, which he sent with Uriah. He wrote in the letter as follows: "Place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be king." So here we go. I mean, Yeah, I mean, our commentary says Yoav accepted the orders without question. And Uriah was so loyal, he didn't open the. David knew that if he sent these orders sealed with Uriah wouldn't open them. He didn't. Um, uh, so when Yoav was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at the point where he knew that there were able warriors. Um, It says here about Yoav, by the way, it says he may have thought they were based on important tactical considerations on David's part, and therefore he was prepared to execute, even though that's really specious logically, right? Put him where there's going to be the most intense fighting, and then fall back, which will cause him to die. Like, what is the tactical consideration for specifically killing one officer? Like, and again, not a general. We're talking like a lieutenant, a captain, not even a colonel, maybe lieutenant colonel, but probably not higher than that. This is like a functionary adjutant, right? He's to a big guy, to be fair. He's like, yeah, maybe a colonel, something like that. But he's not like a general. He's not like the top guy. He's like a big fighter and platoon leader. Anyway, so he puts there able warriors, which says something for Yoav that he didn't surround him with weaklings, so that it would be, or you might say he didn't make it obvious, right? He surrounded him with able warriors, so Uriah's like, oh yeah, we're all tough, we're gonna win this fight, and he doesn't see coming what's gonna happen. In verse 17, men from the city sailed out and attacked Yoav, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. Uriah the Hittite was among those who died. Yoav sent, yeah. Well, that's a good question. It's a good question. And the answer is Judaism isn't just one. Judaism exists from a time before there was some separation between ethnicity and religion and culture. So Judaism's a little harder to place them. You say our religion. Part of our religion is our attachment to Jewish people. And part of that is to understand the figures of our history. Now, the English don't, well, you might even say Anglicans are kind of this. But you're talking about Shakespeare. That's important for understanding the English culturally, right? But English isn't a religion. So it's not really important to Anglicanism that you read Shakespeare. But these writings, even the parts that are history and political, are wrapped into the foundation of our religion, which is in part based on Jewish peoplehood and Jewish history. So understanding these figures teaches us about how we are meant to act, and we use history to do that. Sure, yes. I mean, right there. Yeah, yes. Sorry. So I would say that's does that get to what you asked? We learn from these flawed figures, and unlike pure literature, like you would call, Shakespeare, um, this is wrapped in this religious context. And it's essentially um, teaching us morality from a Jewish context. How do we be moral in a Jewish sense? It's not just build a parapet on top, build a fence on top of your house and keep kosher. There's no morality in that. That doesn't give you the answers to that's just what you do about food and building. Um, yeah, right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
He did.
Right.
King David didn't.
Right. No, absolutely. You're right. That is a different lesson we're learning here that we haven't learned previously. There, you say it could be made differently. I do remind you, and even though this part I can't prove, soon I'm going to be able to actually say to you, I can prove it. This may well have happened. Like we don't just say this story just because it's not just literature. A lot of this, especially the closer we get, we're very close to the historical record at this point. We don't just tell this story because it's a story. We tell it because it also may well be a story we can learn from because it truly did occur. Like if these people, some of them were real people. Um, they all may well have been. I'm just saying I can't prove it. And at this point, I can't prove it for many of them. I think I can prove it. We think we can prove David existed. Maybe not all the stories about David, but that a David existed. That says this came from the house of David. So we know that they were at least identified with David contemporarily at the time when the text says that they called themselves the kings of the day. Um, yeah, true. Um, I think it's just worth noting that beyond the fact that it may have happened, there are things we're learning here that are important about the fact that Jews are also the flawed people that which we don't need this to tell us because Torah tells us plenty of times that we're flawed. But we repeat these things. We also say it could have been put elsewhere. It could have been. Does it need? The Torah repeats itself in different ways because it's trying to give us the Shivim Panim La Torah. It's trying to give us the 70 faces of the Torah that help us interpret to get to the core of it by seeing the different faces of it, right? Think back to the closest analogy to this I can express only makes sense if you've played video games for the last 30 years, like I have. Because it used to be that characters had these shapes. Their faces were this. They looked like ducks, right? Because you couldn't model a face. And eventually they looked like big things because they had many panels, but it looked more like a round head almost. And eventually now it looks like basically Uncanny Valley. They almost look like people. It needs the different faces so that we can see the picture better, so that we can get a better shot at a good interpretation that will lead to us doing Judaism correctly, which essentially means living life in the way God wants us to. So that's my answer as to its. And why does it need to be this way? I don't know. Look, it's an uncomfortable story for me to read. I don't like to hear that King David did all this. This is bad, but I don't like it. Like, it's a real thing that happened. And David will also face his look. Right. He faces punishment for his adultery. It's not like he doesn't face the kind of punishment Saul faced, but it doesn't mean he doesn't face it. Okay, let's finish off this story and then we can talk about David's. So Yoav sent a full 18. Yoav sent a full report of the battle to David. He instructed the messenger as follows: when you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, the king may get angry and say to you, "Why did you come so close to the city to attack it? Didn't you know that they would shoot from the wall?" This is how Yoav put into effect because he didn't actually, in the actual what happened, he didn't pull the troops back exactly. He just put this small force very close to the wall where he knew sometimes they came out with 100 guys and did a surprise ambush if they got too close, right? So that Yoav's plan was actually way more understandable, logical than David's. In a modern war context, there would have been an investigation, right? If suddenly the 10 other guys pulled back and one guy was left facing guns. But if it was like this, what can you do? They got too close. There was a raid. It happens sometimes. Unfortunately, Uriah perished. Um, so the king might say this. It says, "Who struck down Abimelech, son of Yerubashal? Was it not a woman who dropped an upper millstone on him from the wall at Tebez, from which he died? Why did you come so close to the wall? Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite was among those killed." So what's Yoav doing essentially here? He's using the report to say what happened, but also to kind of cover his own. Like because this was such a questionable thing, he's like, this way, if the king gets mad about it, just be like, okay, but like this was the maneuver. Like it had this terrible maneuver was only terrible because I knew it would get. He could probably say many different things, but right. But in this case, he just says, well, but if you say Uriah was killed, David will be like, okay, fine, I get it. It was necessary because you were trying to get done what I wanted you to do. So I won't question that particular order because I see what you were doing. The messenger set out. He came and told David all that Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, first their men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Then we drove them back up to the entrance to the gate. But the archers shot at your men from the wall, and some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah the Hittite also. Whereupon David said to the messenger, give Joab this message. Do not be distressed about the matter. The sword always takes its toll. Press your attack on the city and destroy it. Encourage him. In other words, say that the king gets it. It's all good. Do your thing. Essentially, he's just saying like, you're good. Everything's good. Thank you for doing what I asked. You can keep going and understand I'm with you. Like, you've got my full support. You did everything I asked. I'm not upset that we got guys killed and we had to fight just to get back to our original position. Like, I'm not upset. Okay. Right? When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife, and she bore him a son. But God was displeased with what David did. Went through the appropriate mourning period. Like she went through Shiva, Shloshim. Shloshim is all she technically has. Right. She said Kaddish, she covered the mirror, she did Jewish mourning, essentially. She did that for a month. And then after that, he said, okay, you come live with me now. Right. To everyone else, as the commentators say, to everyone else, there was a story, by the way, which is easy to explain politically, right? The king comforted a widow whose husband died in battle and married her, perhaps out of the goodness of his. He's like, what a PR story that could be. Oh my goodness. This woman's husband was a triumphant Hittite fighter of the king, and he fell in battle. So what did the good king do? She was pregnant, and now her husband was dead. And the king, out of the goodness of his heart, brought her up to be one of the, not top hogs of the king, but, a wife of the king, and the kid would grow up in the royal palace. Oh, what a story. If you don't know the whole story. Yeah. No, again, to the world where nobody knows about the adultery except David, Bathsheba, maybe Joab, and God. Joab could guess maybe, but it doesn't really say. He never really told him. And God. And therefore the prophet will know. But that's it. Nobody else knows that there was any adultery. But we know. The Jewish people know for all history. And we know that God was displeased with David. And we don't hear that very often. Right? God's usually pretty happy with David. God is not happy here, though. He did grave evil. This incident, there are two transgressions here, two sins, both of which entail the death. It's worth saying. David won't get it, but he'll have a tough life because of it. Adultery with a married woman, for which the primary responsibility was David's. And the second transgression was the murder of Uriah, ordering the murder of Uriah. Being responsible for the death is murder in Judaism. We don't have first degree, second degree, we don't have the way the U.S. code has murder. We just have, if you're responsible for somebody's death, it's a murder. You might hear call this what? It's like second, third degree murder when you're planning it. Yeah. I don't know what. Right. Yeah. I think that's either second or third degree in America. This is just murder. No, 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 no. No, not this one. No, 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 no. No, his firstborn kid gets real presumptuous that when he thinks it's his turn to be king, and then he fights a civil war. We'll get to it. It's coming up. It's coming up. Yeah, yeah, right. It's. They're gonna get to it before the end of. Oh, okay. We'll get there. Um, So, political David versus pious David. What are we looking at? What kind of David do we see in the chapter 11 story of David and Bathsheba, and of course Uriah the Hittite? Yeah, sure. And of course, he's not. His first instinct isn't to. It is to him. It's not to vicious, right? His first instinct is to give the guy gifts and try and I often relate David to Caesar a lot. I often feel Julius Caesar must have read from the writings because their political ability was they both acted in exactly the same way. And this was at first he's like, no, you get gifts, you come home, gets him drunk. He tries a couple times to get the guy to like. It's not like he says tries once and he goes, okay, didn't work, kill the guy. Like he tries a couple times to get him to sleep with the guy. It's basically right up until he kind of insults him. Basically says, everyone else that's a real man is fighting them, except for me and you. It's like, and I'm not going to be the guy who sits on couches and is lazy and stuff. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's not. But he tries a couple times, and then he goes to the murder. Right.
Then he sues.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. He's sitting there, and she's right. She's
They also speak to even today's people, and I don't mean this to criticize anyone.
Sure.
Their deepest need that some people have can cause us to do bad things. Essentially, it causes people to get into addictions. It causes people to have affairs. And if we don't deal with what that issue is inside, we will do things like this. Maybe
It's interesting. What would you say David's issue was? He fell into one of the traps. Remember in Deuteronomy, Laws of Kings. Now, again, time-wise, if we want to look at actual chronology, Deuteronomy may come after this story, There's a chance that it's mostly refined. Moses may well have said it, but it's a chance it may have been mostly refined during the period of Josiah, king of Judah, later on, where he finds Deuteronomy in the temple and something. A little suspect. It's been around for a while. You think somebody would have walked by that part before, but whatever. But in it, it warns against kings acquiring too much of three things, right? Money, right? Money, horses, and wives, or women. Right, and that's obviously carries with it the death penalty. Adultery with a married woman carries the death penalty, which David isn't. Again, as far as the world knows, David didn't commit adultery because what has to happen? What do the rabbis end up saying? Again, the rabbis are 1,000 years or more after David, more than 1,000 years. But did they end up saying for Jewish law that you need to convict someone of something like adultery? Thank you. 2 witnesses. First speech you all do. Yeah. It should be exactly. Yes, yes. Mhm. We are all human. He certainly succumbed to, yes, base desires. He saw something and he wanted it because, as I often like to quote the great sage, it's good to be the king. And you figured you're the king. You can do what you like, and that's what he did. Yes, free will. Sure, absolutely. Well, actually, so the problem, as God understands, is that we aren't. If we were perfect, we would make the right choices all the time. If we were perfect, we'd make the right choices every single time. Obviously, that's not a standard that anyone's holding any human being to. Achieved it. We're far from perfect. But God wasn't creating us to be. God was essentially trying to create something unpredictable by God. And something that would choose. This is the greatest, most interesting, I think, aspect of human engagement with theology, is that God creates us, Asher will say, because God wants a relationship, something that can choose a relationship. We're the only thing that can choose. And the choosing is necessary. If we don't have free will 100% of the time, then we can't ever really choose. 99% free will is as good as 0%. And right now, human beings struggle with, we can either have perfect free will or we can have perfection. We can make the right choices. But we certainly can't have. But Judaism is a process of trying to get to that. That's a good question. I think we do as the Jewish people specifically to complain about David's actions.
But I think Mitzi was exactly right. Being aware and then wrong, saying, well, what would this do? Is what leads us to live better.
Right. We're supposed to make the choice. He's supposed to see the beautiful woman. He's supposed to know I can summon her here and sleep with her if I want to. and he's supposed to not do it. That's the right choice. Not that he's not going to feel those things, but that he's going to just sit there and go, no, I obviously won't do that. It's the wrong thing to do. God wouldn't want me to do that because that's a bad way to live. And then he's not supposed to do it. Obviously, he made a different choice. Many people have made different choices. Does it mean he's irredeemable? Well, yes, and that's the second thing that's the death penalty worth thing that our commentators knew. There were two crimes in this chapter that were worthy of the death penalty, had they been witnessed by two people, which they weren't. And that the second one is murder. Is he decides that he's got a better plan to make sure he and his political power don't go. He remembers what happened to Saul when Saul publicly in front of the army decided to throw away the priests and say that he didn't need to wait for them or to wait for the prophet. He didn't want to be publicly put in a position where he commits religious infidelity. If that happens, he's worried the same thing happens to him. To Saul. If the kingship is taken away, that the priest and the prophet will find another guy with a good story to be king, because they've done it twice now. They did it with Saul. They didn't like him. They replaced him with David. David is very aware, I think, that he can be replaced still, because the story as we know it hasn't unfolded yet. That's what I'm saying. Because it wasn't, Saul publicly broke with God by summoning the prophet's spirit, by doing these things publicly, by attacking with the army without the blessing of the prophet, without rolling Urim and Thummim and getting the right result. By not listening and by doing that publicly, especially in view of the army, I argue that he essentially politically made it unstable for him to be the king when he was basically when Saul's political position was the king overrules the religious authorities. That was the constant evolving threat, besides Saul's madness, which was obviously another important reason for the religious authority to want to replace him. Those two things played together and led to his replacement. If David started to say, I can do whatever I want, David might also worry that his position would become less. Well, but is it pious David or is he political David? Because if he's political David, he goes, what are you talking about? God, this is about power. This is about the religious authorities, the priests and the prophet, versus me, the king, as it was with Saul. He's political David. He doesn't really, the God part is there for him to do his thing. Maybe he likes it. Maybe it's helpful. Maybe he even believes it a little bit. But it's not, if he's political David, then it's not his primary feeling. If he's pious David, why did he do this? Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, this is the when we're looking at these two views of David, this is the tension. If he's pious, how could he have done it? And if he's just political, then we're in trouble because we've got another confrontation coming between a king that is unrestrained, which is what God warned about. Remember, we're still in the books of Samuel. At the beginning of the first book of Samuel, which it feels like a long time ago, we're still doing it, but remember that Samuel and God were bemoaning the fact that there had to be a king because God and the religious authorities understood that a king would naturally become, especially in the ancient world, become unrestrained. And that being unable to control the king might lead the king to start being like the kings of these other nations, where they declare themselves God, essentially, or co-equal with God. right? In Egypt, in Babylon, in other Mesopotamian cultures, the king essentially becomes co-equal with God. And that is not what God or Judaism wants. But it might be what an earthly king wants for themselves. And so they have good reason to fear the unrestrained king. They want a pious king because a pious king will naturally succeed to the religious authorities. Now, if you're a nationalist or a medievalist in Europe, for instance, you hate this, right? Those medieval European kingdoms kind of didn't like that the Pope had so much control over their kings, right? Because they were subordinate to religion. That's kind of why a lot of them stopped doing so much with the Pope and the Catholics, because they wanted to be number one, right? Charles III is what? Among many other titles. That's one they kept from back when Henry lived. But head of the church, right? They don't want David to be head of the synagogue, whatever. They don't want David to be head of the temple. They want the religious authorities to remain the religious authorities, and for the king to stay in his name. It's supposed to be when it's supposed to be, but rarely is. It's supposed to be, and when David did it well at the beginning, and when Saul did it well at the very beginning, it was the religious authority supported the king to the people, and the king supported and did what the religion told him to do. And as long as that works, the religious authorities are happy because everybody's religious, which is true in every religion and every culture where there are religious authorities. And the king is happy because he has reasonable power and the love of the people and the support of the military. And the military is happy because they're winning and God is with them and everything. And everyone's happy if it works. The problem is sometimes kings get big for their britches. And sometimes religious authorities overreach. Netanyahu is a whole different. He's a monster of a different name. He's. I don't mean monster because none of the Gaza stuff are monster. But yeah, yes, but essentially, when you believe you can do anything, you have the right to do anything, then you do anything. And that is a problem for everyone else. And so David now is becoming a bit of a problem. Anyone who says they speak heaven probably is lying. I don't speak. Just me. Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, so we've got, we move on to chapter 12. And now, of course, God was displeased. So we now have to get a measure of God's displeasure with David, who up until now, God has been really pleased with. God has been like, yeah, you're a pretty good guy, and you're gonna do great things, and your son will build my temple, and all this great stuff. And so God sent Nathan, the prophet, to David. He came to him and said, he's got a parable named Shal. He says, there were two men in the same city, one rich and one poor. The rich one had very large flocks and herds, but the poor one had only one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He tended it, and it grew up together with him and his children. It used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup, and nestle in his bosom. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler came to the rich man, but he was loath to take anything from his own flocks or herds to prepare a meal for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. I say nimshal. In the Talmud, we would call it a nimshal. It's a parable. And what's he saying? He's presenting it not as a parable. He's presenting it as if this is really something that happened in a city in David's control. He's saying what? He's saying, my king, what would you do to such a man, right? He's turning David into who? We won't know him for a couple of weeks. Just had a holiday. Ahasuerus. What happened? Right? They come to the right. They're turning him into, maybe it's even Haman. Not Haman. They're not turning him into Haman, but they're fooling him in the same way, right? David. Let's see it coming. We get the full irony. David, verse 5, flew into a rage against the man and said to Nathan, as God lives, Kai Adonai, kiven mavet ha'ish. Says the man who did this deserves to die. Okay, right? David understands that it's not even just an act of robbery, that there's been on a deep level terrible injustice done. He's capable of seeing. In another situation, he hasn't gone insane like Saul. He's capable of reasoning and right? He plays the role, whether he might be, but he plays the role well of the righteous king. So when the prophet comes to him and says, this terrible injustice has been done, David is all on board with helping the prophet, right? Because it's an easy win for him. Just give them what they want when it doesn't matter to him. That's the easiest political win you can ever get. Just if giving them what they want costs you nothing, then give them what they want. And so if what the religious people want is for this guy to be punished, David says, great, you got it. He can go death. Let's go for death. Right? David's going to be super pious here. What else does he say? He says, he must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and showed no pity. Now, it's a lamb, not a person. So, it's absolutely right. Right, because he had no compassion for the poor man's only possession, not so much. And here is where you mentioned before, Vayomar Natan el David, Ata ha'ish. Nathan said to David, you are that man. Story isn't hypothetical. Ho Amar Adonai, and now we get, again, this is an important smackdown verse that's happening when you read this in Hebrew. Because you get the dread that would fall over David as he hears this line. Nathan says to him, Vayomer Natan el David, Ta ha'ish, Ko Amar Adonai, and he starts to say, you are the man, and thus says, he starts to go into the prophetic. Suddenly David realizes it's a trap, and I fell into it. And this guy is starting with the words that mean, Ko Amar Adonai, meaning God, this is him speaking for God now. And I'm in trouble. So you get, well, I mean, he was there, and I mean, if I could go up, if I was in the same room as Donald Trump, I could say anything to him for a couple seconds. I mean, I mean, even if he had me shot at that point, it doesn't matter. I got a couple. You just can't act that quickly. So there's nothing he can do. He's talking. He says, thus says God, Ho'amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, right? We're getting real, we're going deep into the references here. We're getting Elohei Yisrael, right? The God of Israel, because we really want to invoke how bad this was. We're getting to the ultimate source of authority. Thus says the Eternal, the God of Israel, it was I who anointed you king over Israel, and it was I who rescued you from the hand of Saul. right? We see this a lot. This happens to the people of Israel, to Moses back in the Torah, where God first reminds people, remember what I did for you. Remember I redeemed you from the land of Egypt. Remember that I gave you manna in the wilderness. Remember that you don't exist if not for me. It was I who rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and possession of your master's wives. Right? We're talking about wives here. So God's going to talk about wives. I gave you all of these other wives, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that were not enough, I would give you twice as much more. Right? Like what is that? I would give you twice as much more, meaning essentially what? Meaning, have I ever denied you anything? Right? Is there anything that you've really wanted, that you've asked for, that I haven't given you? That you would break all the most sacred rules that I set up for this society? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just my perspective, but like, I imagine this is God leveling with this guy, being like, how could you be so foolish? Like, for what? Like, you could have 100 more. I wasn't going to stop you from anything. You could have, and by the way, this is in that movie I keep referencing to you, The Disputation, about Barcelona, when Nachmanides is speaking to King John, and he says, King David could have 100 wives. His only sin was adultery with Bathsheba, who was a married woman, and that's not allowed. But otherwise, God is saying, you could have had 100 other beautiful women. Why did you do this? And I will give you twice as much more. Why then have you flouted God's command? This is the prophet in God's voice, and done what displeases me. You have put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife and made her your wife, and had him killed by the sword of the Ammonites. What do you mean neutralized? What do you mean? That's certainly true, and of course, there is the political aspect, the historical aspect. We have a very popular king who can't be convicted of anything because there are no witnesses. Okay, sure. Well, no, unlike this one who's only got like 45% support, David has like 95% support. He wins all his wars. He's super attractive and popular. He's a good speaker. He gives gifts to the people. He doesn't overtax them. Mostly he's a fair ruler too. They love this guy. If God were to replace him, I don't know how to say this other than now God has a political because God's messengers have to because God doesn't speak directly to the people at this point. Now, if God was willing to have another Sinai moment, which obviously isn't going to happen, you could probably make that case. But just with Nathan going around giving speeches and the priests in every town talking, it would seem like to the people of the time, remember, you have to work within free will. Wouldn't it seem more, which sounds more plausible to you, with all your more advanced reason, that David committed adultery with this woman he had taken in after his warrior had been killed, and therefore the priests replace him with somebody new who was more pious, or the priests were worried about losing their power because David was a super good king who also did everything according to the rules, and so maybe the people would just follow David and not bother with the religious authorities, and so the religious authorities replaced him to preserve their power. I'm just saying. But no, I'm just saying what makes more sense is that I think here there's a reason why there are more than one reason why David gets a chance at repentance. And one of the reasons is human existence like human free will exists. And if the people decide the religion is just corrupt because it's replacing leaders whenever it feels like it, there's a chance the whole project goes up in flames. And that's not what God wants. God's thinking on the very, very, very long term. Yeah, of course. That's it. Yeah. Later, he is politically neutralized, essentially. Well, yeah. But he comes back, right? He gets to live it out in the end. Oh, chas v'shalom. Let's not. I don't need any more Jews talking about it. We don't need it. We don't need us talking about. It's enough that the people on the internet. But you see my point, right? It's that's an easy way out, but also it doesn't answer to the free will argument. It doesn't answer to the reality, political realism, logical. And it doesn't answer to the philosophical argument that advocates teshuva. So those are three good reasons why David doesn't just get killed by God, even though, I mean, he did two things worthy of the death penalty. Again, the death penalty is given by a court. You're not convicted, you didn't commit murder. Just as far as society is concerned, you didn't do it. Like here, if you're declared innocent or not charged, you didn't do it. I mean, according to our thing, if you're acquitted, we're not brought up on charges, then you didn't do it. So we can't sit here and say we can know that David did it and condemn him for it, and understand that realistically, that's not going to affect him politically in this way. Okay, so the prophet is still yelling. So just all this stuff says, therefore, verse 10. So now we've got, the ata. We've got we got the preamble with all the in your declaration, whereas, and now we're down to therefore, let it be done. So therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife, right? Thereby showing no self-restraint. You could not restrain yourself. And restraining yourself is the most important thing God wants of a king, is to keep themselves restrained. I mean, yes, and it's not even for everybody. This is specifically for, again, we're talking about a political project. God is trying to keep that project going. And the only way you can, imagine a game where you have to keep these two bars close to level to move forward. And the two bars are the power of the religious authorities and the king. If they're close to even, you move forward. And if they're not, everything falls apart. That's how I would urge you to conceptualize. So thus says God, we get into the Kohamar, right? Here I am, behold. Thus says God, I will make a calamity rise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes. Ye shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. You acted in secret, but I will make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight. He says, okay, this is essentially what God's saying. I can't get you publicly. I can't get you for this. I don't have the witnesses. But there will be, right? History, it rhymes. Somebody said, sorry, that's probably not right. So essentially, okay, but something of equal and opposite reaction will happen to you. It's going to be fun. You're going to have to go through it in front of everyone because you deserve to go through something horrible in front of everyone. God is deciding on a just punishment. He's not taking it away from you, but you're going to have rebellions. You're never going to be able to put the sword down, right? And that sucks because he spent chapter 11 trying to put the sword, letting other people fight his battle. It's not going to work. I will make it happen. All Israel, Neged Hashemesh. David said to Nathan, Hatati Ladonai, I sinned before God. Since here, I stand guilty. Said, I sinned before God. Nathan replied to David, God has remitted your sin. You shall not die. However, since you have spurned the enemies of God by this deed, even the child about to be born to you shall die. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like saying like there won't be any good that comes of this. Like, just so you know, your action born of pure malice and madness there will be no good. You won't be able to look back at it and say, oh, well, at least I got this kid, or at least I got this silver line. There will be no silver lining to your action. You will face a punishment, and it will be a total punishment. But you won't die because I believe you when you say that when you admit your guilt before God, and essentially that's it. So this is David submitting essentially to the religious authorities. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That answers your question. It was coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It was coming up pretty
I have. So,
Yeah, that you that works for you. That's great. It doesn't. You can think this makes me. It doesn't bother me. It's one of those things where it's easier to just put in the realm of. I'm not even sure. It was 3,000 years ago, and it may be. Also, this is the ancient world. It's not on the throne of various reasons. I think you can view it in different ways. If you want to view it purely in the theological retributive punishment, okay. But it's improper for God to take this kid's life. It's penance for his father's sin. But we do, I mean, we believe God can and does forgive the iniquity that's passed on from parent to child. But that is technically conditioned in our theology, just so you know, I think. Right, yes. That we believe that God forgives, that it can go up to 7 or 10 generations. 7 comes from one place, and then in my Holy Day liturgy, we say that God forgives even to the 10th generation. Going back if they did something. And we believe that God chooses to forgive that because God doesn't think it's fair. He thinks it's fair. Conditional. Judaism, this is the biggest thing, especially for anyone who grew up in the West, because we all lived in a Christian world. And Christian world, there's this great Facebook page if you're ever interested in seeing what the world, America, would be like if everything was from a Jewish perspective and not a Christian. It's great. It's called Medinat America. And Medinat America does it's fun. It does school announcements from we understand that for the week of Hanukkah, some children will be celebrating the holiday of Feast of Christmas. And And we understand they may want to be out of school on that day, but unfortunately, we can't just let everyone out of school for every random Easter and Christmas. You understand? Like it's a fool. It's reversed. And in Christian world, and this is fine, forgiveness is supposed to be, forgiveness is such an automatic, such a good that forgiveness should be automatic. Judaism never has believed that, doesn't believe it, throw it out. You're thinking from a Jewish perspective. Forgiveness is earned. Forgiveness is never automatic. That is an innovation that Jesus brought to Christians, but it's never reflected our philosophy. So that's it's just worth noting. It's a lot more common. There's a process of forgiveness by which you admit your guilt before someone like this. It starts with admitting your guilt. David is doing. Yep, that's part of it. I mean, it's just no, it's okay. I know we're getting past 10 o'clock and things are happening. We can pick this up later. Because we've got